first of all, I'd like to thank Anna for inviting us from the UK and from Spain to come today to this conference. It's been really great, and it's been great working with Anna and her team for over a year now. So I'm going to present some background information to the rationale for the study, and then Anna will talk about the aims and the phases of the research, and she'll do that in Portuguese, so that will be easier for the majority of people here. And just so you know, Anna and I did not plan to wear the same dress this morning. We should talk next time. So the study, which we've called Men's Substance Use.
Então, como ela disse, então eu vou falar, é uma pesquisa financiada por uma agência inglesa, Economic and Social Research Council, e a FAPESP, aqui no Brasil, a FAPESP financia a pesquisa e o CNPq financiou esse seminário, a vinda dos professores, a tradução simultânea, o técnico de som que ainda não chegou. É uma colaboração entre diversas universidades inglesas, brasileiras, porque eu e a professora Lília da Universidade de São Paulo, a Unifesp com a professora Ana Regina Noto e a UFSCar com o professor Wagner. E também a Generalitat de Catalunha como um departamento de saúde, né? uma Secretaria de Saúde do Estado da Catalunha e a OMS. Então, é uma composição, é uma pesquisa que o tempo inteiro busca essa composição entre diferentes atores, diferentes lugares. Então, a racionalidade do estudo, quer dizer, o marco teórico que nos orienta para trabalhar isso é que a violência por parceiro íntimo ela acontece em todos os países, em todas as culturas, em todos os grupos. Entretanto, há características que são mais específicas, culturais, que precisam ser consideradas para prevenir e tratar, incluindo as definições culturais e as expectativas do que são papéis de gênero adequados ou não adequados, né? E a crença na superioridade inerente dos homens, né? Ou masculina, e a aceitabilidade da violência como a resolução de conflito. Então, a crença na superioridade masculina é um traço da cultura, e ela vai mudando com o tempo, e ela é colocada em diversas, vamos dizer, expressões, né? A facilidade de divórcio, a posse dos bens. Então, é uma questão cultural que vem se transformando, mas que permanece, né? Apesar disso, então, o nosso entendimento do papel das crenças culturais na violência por parceiro íntimo e na sua perpetração ainda é bastante limitado. It would be better if
Recent meta-analysis, so we know that there's a higher risk of experiencing intimate partner violence among women who have mental health problems compared to women who do not.
Então, a gente sabe que tem um risco mais alto das mulheres terem problemas de saúde mental, as mulheres que sofrem violência por parceiro íntimo, daquelas que não estão nessa experiência.
And we know that people who experience intimate partner violence have higher risks of substance use, chronic pain, gastrointestinal and gynecological problems.
A gente também sabe que as mulheres que estão em situação de violência têm um risco maior de abuso de substâncias, dor crônica, problemas intestinais e problemas de saúde reprodutiva e ginecológico.
And a recent meta-analysis of cohort of longitudinal studies have found that people who experience intimate partner violence then go on to develop depressive disorders or depressive symptoms.
Então, e a gente sabe que as mulheres que estão vivendo situações de violência doméstica têm um risco maior de terem sintomas depressivos e a tentativa de suicídio, né? Esses são resultados bastante consistentes ao longo dos anos e de estudos em diversos lugares.
And among perpetrators, we know that men who are violent towards their partners are also more likely to have mental health problems such as depression, anxiety and panic disorder.
E também entre os homens agressores, a gente também sabe que eles têm um risco maior de ter depressão, ansiedade e transtorno do pânico.
And perpetrators attribute their depression and anxiety to the fact that they have perpetrated intimate partner violence.
Então, e também e os homens agressores atribuem a sua depressão e a sua ansiedade ao fato deles estarem cometendo violência contra o parceiro.
And we know that among people who are in treatment for alcohol and drug use, we know that women have a much higher rate of experiencing intimate partner violence than women in the general population.
E a gente sabe também que as mulheres que têm problemas com o uso de álcool, substâncias, elas têm uma chance maior de serem vítimas de violência por parceiro íntimo.
And among men who are in treatment for alcohol or drug use, about 40% of them say that they have physically or sexually abused their partners, and these rates are about 4 times higher than among men in the general population.
Homens que buscam ou estão recebendo tratamento para abuso de substâncias, você tem 38 a 40% deles dizendo que eles cometeram algum ato de violência física ou sexual contra suas parceiras, o que são taxas 4 vezes mais altas do que a de homens nos Estados Unidos.
But there is a great division about the importance of different factors that might contribute to intimate partner violence. So the feminist theory would consider intimate partner violence as men's.
Por hablar, Então, tem uma divisão sobre a importância dos diferentes fatores envolvidos na violência por parceiro íntimo. Fatores individuais, fatores situacionais, fatores culturais e sociais. A teoria feminista considera a violência por parceiro íntimo como exercício do poder sobre a mulher numa sociedade patriarcal, ou uma parte das teorias feministas. Teorias mais sobre o indivíduo consideram questões de traço de personalidade, características do funcionamento mental do agressor. Teorias sociais consideram o meio ambiente e o entorno, como a estrutura da família, o estresse e aprendizado social. E fatores mais situacionais incluem motivações individuais, percepções de risco, circunstâncias e consequências que aquele indivíduo traz para eventos específicos. Então, há teorias, diversas teorias sobre quais seriam as principais causas da violência por parceiro íntimo. E nenhum fator, é um assunto bastante complexo que nenhum fator sozinho explica.
So we know that there are certain demographic factors, certain distal factors, so things like childhood victimization, witnessing violence as a child, proximal factors such as substance use, and cultural factors such as sexist attitudes that contribute to partner violence.
Então, já está bastante demonstrado, né, que existem fatores que são ligados às características sociodemográficas, como pessoas mais jovens, ou com menor condição socioeconômica, fatores do passado, como vitimização na infância, ter presenciado violência entre os pais, ter tido ausência do pai durante a infância, fatores mais próximos do evento, como o uso de substâncias, problemas psicológicos, formas de expressão da raiva, e fatores culturais, como atitudes sexistas e papéis de gênero específicos e rígidos, né?
So this slide was just to show that there's interaction between all of those different factors, and some may be protective and some may be risk factors at different levels. So the individual, relationship, community,
this slide is not showing us there. O slide não aqui é um modelo ecológico de tentar compor esses diversos fatores ligados ao indivíduo, ligados ao grupo familiar, ligados à comunidade, ligados à sociedade. Então, é, na verdade, um círculo, que não está aparecendo aqui, porque lá no dela está vermelhinho, um círculo de fatores individuais, né? Um círculo maior de fatores relacionados às relações desse indivíduo, um círculo maior à comunidade, um maior à sociedade, mostrando que um afeta o outro e o outro afeta o um, né? São círculos concêntricos em que as coisas podem se somar e nenhum fator sozinho explica por que ocorrem os casos. Oh, now he's done.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anna. So, there's definitely something there. Okay. So we wanted to think about the relationship between substance use and intimate partner violence. Got smiling faces or not smiling faces? Is it working? Anybody? Yes? Okay. Substance use and violence are excessive alcohol consumption. Drug use. Does that work? Can you hear me now? Okay. Start again. So the relationship between alcohol and drugs and intimate partner violence. Of the various factors associated with intimate partner violence, excessive alcohol use is one of the most controversial. We know that alcohol and drug use are associated with increases in domestic violence. We know that physical violence is more likely and more severe on days when drinking occurred. But we also know that there's a strong expectancy that the use of alcohol causes marital problems and aggression is associated with intimate partner violence among men in treatment for alcohol problems. So thinking about some of the explanations about why this relationship might exist, there are three main models. The spurious model suggests that there are variables common to both substance use and domestic violence, such as age or antisocial personality disorder. Secondly, the indirect effects model, which suggests that substance use can lead to marital conflict, that can lead to violence within that relationship. And finally, the proximal effects model, would suggest that substances have a pharmacological effect which can increase or facilitate intimate partner violence through cognitive processing or the expected effects of intoxication and lowered inhibitions. So what does this mean for us in research and also in our practice? We know that there is no doubt that beliefs about men's power and control over women contribute to intimate partner violence. But we argue that other risk factors need to be incorporated into treatment for maximum effectiveness.
Agora eu queria chamar o Carlos para ele contar sobre o que é a rede de aprendizagem. Cadê o Carlos? Que ideia é essa, né? Qual é a tua? Essa? Não. Não. Capabilities, não. Presentation, não. LA Brasil.
I am so sorry. I will speak in English only because I am working in England and I have not been working in Spanish for quite some time. So my Spanish is not as good. Neither is my English, by the way.
As pessoas estão conseguindo todas acompanhar? Quem não está conseguindo acompanhar? Some of them are not being able to follow because there are no
I can give mine as well.
Go.
Okay. Here there is another one. I am just going to talk about a component. It's a component of the project that we are doing, and it has to do with some model that is called the Learning Alliance. The Learning Alliance is, I suppose, it has emerged from various developing countries and experience of researchers working in developing countries. And basically what they are trying to do is to problematize the way how we produce knowledge, how we disseminate knowledge, and how we do push people to use the findings of research. If you see on the left, the traditional model is that we do some research, we write the reports for the funders, and then the report goes to the shelf of the funders, and eventually, here and there, some things are taken by the policymakers. So the Learning Alliance model tries to problematize that in research as a mode of production, of knowledge production, needs to be problematized, and probably we need methodologies to capture the complexity of how a research project is implemented. And romantically, the idea is to put the beneficiaries of the research at the center. And I think that in health services, it's very important for us to remember that the users of the health services, they are our target. So the idea is how to bring as many as possible stakeholders, local authorities, the government departments, the national institutes, everybody that has to do, that can be a stakeholder in a project. So that is sort of one of the elements behind the origin of the Learning Alliances. And then the second important element is that when we do a research process, we try to focus how we can strengthen our project and how we can again, invite people to use our findings. And if we can do it as fast as possible, probably that will help a lot. Again, based on the same point that sometimes our research stays with the researchers and they don't sort of reach others. So if you think for a moment at the beginning of the project, when the problem is stated, one of the principles of a learning alliance is to bring the policymakers from the beginning and bring them as partners, because we know that if we want our research to have any type of influence, is by the adoption of the policymakers and the policies in whatever the case is. Documenting and reflecting, I think that these are very important activities that sometimes, because all of us, we are in a hurry, we produce things, we write the reports, but there is not a space to reflect and to document things and the processes that we are doing. Then, of course, data collection and data analysis. I suppose when it comes to these two tasks, the idea is to push the researchers to try to process findings as soon as possible, and I will share with you what has happened in our project after 1 year. And instead of waiting for the end to the findings, the idea is if we can, you know, again, try to do things as early as possible. So that is the second thing. And then there are two underpinning elements. On the left, I think that in the various models of impact and evaluation, there is this discussion of contribution versus attribution. Many institutions and many governments like to think in attribution, that because we do an intervention, there is an effect. But many people say that, and all of us, we are aware that the complexity of these processes cannot be reduced to cause and effect. So there have been some models that say what our projects can do is just contribute. So let's be relaxed. There is a relationship probably in what we do in terms of research and the effect that that could have in different stakeholders. The second element underpinning, and is due to one of our colleagues that came with the idea, what is underpinning also what we are doing is how is with the Learning Alliance and how is without the Learning Alliance. I think that we are all the time thinking that if what we are doing makes sense, and then the probability that if we will not have a Learning Alliance, how the reality of the project will be. So those are two underpinning principles. Then what we have in terms of the Learning Alliance specifically, what we have at the international level, we have 3 meetings. The first one was last year in London. We are having currently the one in Brazil, and then the idea is next year to meet again in London to conclude the project and then examine everything that we have done. And parallel, we have 2 local learning alliances, and of course the 2 overlap. We have 6 meetings for the Learning Alliance, the local learning alliances, 1 in London, 1 in Sao Paulo, and in London we have had 3 meetings. But something that I want to address is that already in some of the discussions of the local alliances, the discussions are becoming a bit rich, that people are suggesting additional meetings. And in Sao Paulo, of course, you had a meeting last year, and today we are having a second meeting. And also we are trying to capture things related to the processes, and I will be talking to some of you about how the process is working here. Last year we decided to do a baseline report at the beginning of the project. You know, at the beginning of any project, a baseline helps to see how the reality was at the beginning. I just want to read from the report that we produced. Participants didn't know very much specifically about the Learning Alliance approach during the first meeting. However, they knew about the potential elements of innovation, documentation, dissemination, and networking. I don't know, I am sure many of you as researchers, you are aware that now when we apply for research funding, the questions of the funders is how you are going to disseminate your research, how you are going to document things, because the question about the impact of your research is there. So we have been trying, these are sort of the elements that the Learning Alliance contributes with. And the second point was that the project the loop learning process of what participants learn in the project and what the project actually learns from them. No, the whole thing of the interaction. And that is another element of the Learning Alliance. The idea is to reduce the ego of the researchers, because it's to open a platform to produce a dialogue more than the whole thing of the authority just talking. It's assumed that the International Learning Alliance will work on seeking funding for new research projects involving all the international partners. One of the literature recommends that once you create a network, you have a social capital there. So you should tap into that, because that probably will give you the sustainability for your networks. And we know today how networking is important. So people were, at the baseline report, people were facing these issues. Although the idea of a learning alliance seems obvious, it was thought that some of the methodologies proposed and the ongoing analysis of the learning processes and moments could help to identify the elements that make learning across disciplines, roles, and professions and countries easier. I think that yesterday in the morning, some of you are here, we have the possibility to have a very, very productive exchange. And we are trying to keep an eye how that interaction between different professions, lateral thinking, when we as social scientists have the possibility to interact with psychologists or psychologists with other health professions, I think that a lot of things happen in that interaction, and that is what we try to capture. Just to address, in the UK, we have, as part of the local learning alliance, we have some service users, because I suppose in the UK, at the moment, there is a strong emphasis that research projects need to involve users. And so in the project, we have some users participating, and this is what the person said in the first Learning Alliance meeting. From a personal point of view, I would like to be involved, as I am interested in hearing about the learning best practice, in the hope that I can help direct my peers to the correct services. Also, having the ability to be able to spread this information as widely as possible. I believe that the Learning Alliance has the potential to practice in dealing with IPV, interpartner violence, in substance misuse services. As well, a product of our first meeting was that we developed like a framework trying to follow up 4 elements or processes. The research, I think that Gail and Flavia have talked about the different phases, and like we know, in any research process, those things have to happen. But under the Learning Alliance, we emphasize the networking and how we capture the networking. I think that it has been one of the challenges that we are facing, those moments of interaction in the networks, how we capture that and see if that makes any difference in the reality that we are trying to intervene. Then dissemination and documentation, and then capacity building. So in many ways, I like to think in an analogy, when in the theater, what happens in the behind the scenes. I think that these elements, if documented properly, can contribute to see what happens behind the scenes of any research project. So I want to share with you basically some of the things that are happening in terms of the United Kingdom and Brazil in relation to the project. As Anna and Gail already mentioned, the phase 1, 2, and 3 have been completed in London. And of course, today, in many ways, is a very reflective day for Brazil, because we are trying to complete phase 1, 2, and 3, and we are going to hear later some of the results of the research here. About the UK, last week, we had the 3rd meeting of the local alliance, and the UK team, they were presenting the preliminary findings and some of the findings of the phase 2 and 3 of the project. And we have in the room 2 policymakers, and here I am sort of capturing one of the sentences that I find it quite significant. All the data set from the interviews with service users, it's all new and very interesting to see the raw data before it is analyzed. I just want to say two things about this. First, all of you have the form in your folders, and this is the way how we are trying to capture these processes. I think the questions are very general, because it's not an evaluation about the day, it's about the process. And what we want is to capture new elements, comments, views, situations that this interaction today can, hopefully, will offer. And if you see, we want to know, the first question is about the role. What is your role? The second one is asking for something useful. Hopefully, we are expecting that the project, the day, will offer something useful. And if you can let us know what was that, we will highly appreciate that. And then the other thing is about new ideas, new situations. Again, if we do something new, will you let us know, please? So please, the idea is there with you, the tool. At any moment of the day, you can use it, but please give us the form at the end of the day. The second element, the networking. The networking, again, contrasting what we have done in the UK, in Brazil. We have 32 organizations. The last year in the UK, when we launch and have the first meeting, local and international, with the Learning Alliance. And then last year, you have 24 organizations when you did it here in Brazil. Just to mention about these processes, I knew about the Learning Alliance, and I knew about a very interesting experience here in the UK, in Brazil, but in a different sector. It was in the water sector. So in many ways, what I want to say is that a very successful experience of Learning Alliance in the water management sector that I knew in Brazil, I knew in the UK, and I introduced in the health services. So the idea is coming back to Brazil. Statements that people have said about networking. Again, here one of the policymakers in the UK wrote this last week in the forum: opportunity to hear from others and discuss an emerging topic that I am often asked about. I find the statements of the policymakers quite powerful, and I was thinking, like in the books, when we buy books and someone writes a comment at the back of the book, like this book is excellent because of this or that. In the same way, I was thinking that these statements of policymakers, because the push in the last 20 years how to approach researchers and policymakers, and how to invite policymakers to use our research findings, it has been quite strong. So also another element is that the voluntary sector in the UK is like the NGOs, the equivalent of the NGOs here in the UK. That is, in the UK, voluntary sector is sort of what we will call NGOs. No, people are appreciating the fact of associating themselves with researchers, and sort of they define it as a critical friend. Then yesterday, and here in Brazil, I heard different things, that they thought that it was challenging, stimulating, usefulness of the collective knowledge emerging. But I want to address the element of reflection. I think that in the UK and here, we are seeing that the spaces of bringing different people to dialogue is creating quite a lot of reflection, and very useful. Dissemination as the third element. We initially have a tool, the SharePoint. It didn't work well because the system is a bit complicated. We have to enter through King's College. And so at the moment, we are sort of creating a blog that we hope will document, and we will collect. It will be a point of capturing also the experience of the Learning Alliance. So we have meetings, meetings are emerging. I don't know if the project at some point will be able to get involved in posters, and of course publications are there. And the same for Brazil is something that it will be important. In terms of dissemination, again, one of the two policymakers said last week, opportunities to help disseminate the outputs of the project and build of the capacity of the sector. I think, I mean, the sentence is quite helpful. I am emphasizing the policymakers, but other stakeholders also are important. So I am looking forward very much to your statements in the forum today. The fourth element is more a question that links with Liz. The next presentation, that is another component that the project has, and something that I want to say is that when we designed this project, we were thinking about how to do a very innovative research project. So the question is if we can see the capability framework as a capacity building activity offered by this project. And I don't know, at the moment, there is also the question if we are offering other types of training that eventually can contribute to the impact of the project. Tools, we have been developing forms. It has been a challenge because, again, how you capture these processes. We are trying to document as possible. We are expecting the blog to be a source of information. And then we are talking in the UK to have some focus groups towards the end of the project to absolutely capture more things. Naming is my last point, and here I want to back to the Learning Alliance that I knew. This was a very interesting project in the, as I said, in the water management sector, and that was the title of the project. And they decided, that network decided to call the project Switch in the City, and I suppose playing with the sex in the city. For anybody that wants to have the project, that project, Switch in the City, if you do the Google, you will get the manual, the handbook. It was an experience about learning alliances in 14 cities in the world. Belo Horizonte was one of them in Brazil. So the challenge for all of us today is if you want to suggest some names for our network. I am giving here the title of the project. So the competition is if you want to write in your form some name for our Learning Alliance. Thank you.
Então, quero agradecer o Carlos e eu queria ver, porque assim, chegar a 50 headsets menos do que a gente combinou. Falaram que estão vindo. Quero saber quem não está entendendo, levanta a mão. Tem 3 pessoas, 4, 5, 6. E tem alguém que pode ceder? Não. Porque eles estão a caminho e eu acho que não compensa eu ficar traduzindo, vai atrasar muito, né? Então eu queria pedir desculpa e dizer que isso é fundamental para o learning. There are some people down there that are not listening, so I think it's better to... Ruth, é melhor dar para quem precisa esse aqui, porque vai ser em inglês a próxima. Ou para você mesmo. Então, eu quero super... não, agora vai ser em inglês. Então, a Liz, eu sei, mas eu não tenho mais. Eles disseram... Veja, Gina, quanto tempo demora para chegar os headsets. Eles falaram que estão mandando. Nós vamos, então, agora... Can you put yours? Liz vai apresentar em inglês, porque ela só fala inglês. O desenvolvimento de eu não sei como traduzir capability framework, mas um marco, né, de capacitação e intervenção, os elementos que estão nesse desenvolvimento.
So, thank you. It's great to be here. It's my first trip to Brazil, so I'm very pleased to be able to make this trip, and thank you to Anna for inviting us to attend this meeting. I'll try and talk slowly to allow for the translator, but please put your hand up if I'm going too fast. I am a mental health nurse. I don't understand. Can you hear? Yes. Is it here? All right. I'm a mental health nurse and a nurse academic in the UK, and I've worked in substance misuse and dual diagnosis, when people have mental health and substance use, and I developed a capabilities framework for the Department of Health in England a few years ago to try and help define what workers should be able to do around working with a complex problem such as mental health and substance use. So the idea of a capabilities framework is to try and help people know what their capabilities should be at any given time. So I'm going to use that as an example to talk about how we might develop a capabilities framework from the findings of this project. So the difference between a capability and a competence is important. A competence is something that you can or can't do. It's something that it's a behaviour. A capability is a bit wider than that. A capability encompasses the how of how you do something. So it incorporates the quality of your performance, the ethical dimensions, the way you use culture and values and societies, social awareness. It involves reflection. So it's this idea that you're not an automaton, you're not a robot delivering interventions, that you're tailoring your approach to the individual that's there in front of you. So you're taking your knowledge and your experience, but you're also listening to that person's own perspective as well, and somehow marrying the two together. It's also about being able to use evidence-based practice so that you don't become a practitioner who just does what they did when they trained, that you're constantly evolving your practice and looking for and using new information, which fits into this Learning Alliance process. So I'm not going to talk to you. I've got some slides about the development of the capabilities framework from the dual diagnosis, but because of time, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail. Just to say that the development of the dual diagnosis framework came after the policy was published around dual diagnosis. So and some research that we did in the UK. So our job was really to deconstruct the policy and deconstruct the research into something that leaders of services, commissioners of services and practitioners could identify with and use and guide what they wanted to do. And it also guided training content as well. So we knew if we wanted a group of people to have these kinds of capabilities, this is the kind of things that should be in the training curriculum. There was 3 stages, which is probably how we're going to do the new one. There's a base level of capabilities that everyone who works with dual diagnosis or intimate partner violence, everyone should be able to demonstrate these capabilities, and they'll be fairly sort of general capabilities. The generic, or the sort of level 2, it's really for case managers or people who have a caseload who work, usually people post-degree practitioners who have a caseload, whether it's in substance use, mental health or primary care perhaps, and they're the people who are doing much more of the one-to-one work, interventions and assessment. And then we define a little bit more that they need to do on top of the generic, this is the core. And finally, there's a level 3, which is for people who have a much more of a lead responsibility for this particular topic, who might work with the more complex cases. They might be the lead for intimate partner violence in their organisation. They might offer supervision and support and training within their teams as well. So we've got 3 levels. So the idea, you build it up. So everyone has core. You add on a little for the level 2. You add on a little bit more for the specialists. So just to give you a flavour of what was in the dual diagnosis framework, just to say, and I don't think this is just the UK, that people struggle to work comprehensively with somebody who has problems that can be dealt with in different services. So if someone goes to substance misuse services and they have psychiatric problems, sometimes it's difficult to manage that just within substance use, and sometimes mental health issues get missed. Vice versa, in mental health, the mental health workers may not be confident in doing a drugs assessment and knowing what is a risky behaviour and what isn't, and how to manage that. So the idea is we're trying to bring those skills together in practitioners. So there was things around engagement, the kind of interpersonal skills that are required, high stigmatized groups, so that's really important. We had a whole section on values and attitudes, and I guess it may be the same in Brazil, but people with dual disorders are often very stigmatized and not the most popular group of people to work with. So we really wanted to emphasize the important values about non-judgmental and listening and staying with someone wherever they are. We obviously include education and health promotion, needs and risk assessment, working ethically within the legal framework as well, which I think will be important for this project. Finding out about and using evidence-based practice, accessing supervision, accessing help from other services, and being able to, as a worker, be able to help people navigate that. And again, I think that's going to be really important for this this project. And also how to work with multi-agency and multi-professional groups, because we all come from our own perspective, and a capability in itself is how we work together and how we don't just get into our professional rivalries as well, especially when the person in the middle, who's the service user, often gets lost within that process. So how it's been used in the UK, it's been used in a number of ways. Most continuous professional development, so the kind of training that you would do after you're a trained professional around dual diagnosis, is informed by this capabilities framework. So that means that training across the UK is aligned to this. So there's a standardisation, although people have local variations depending on the need and the groups of people they're training. It's also been used in some of the NHS mental health services as part of a performance appraisal. So when you are working, so I'll give you an example, if you work in an inpatient psychiatric hospital, a huge amount of your clients will also have drug and alcohol problems. So it's important that the psychiatric mental health nurses have the capabilities to work comprehensively with that group. So in appraisal, it becomes part of your performance review. So, you know, how are you doing around these capabilities? What are your training needs? What do you need? What's your development needs? And it's also being used in job descriptions. We're having a growth in link worker roles around substance misuse, mental health, and those roles have defined capabilities within those role descriptions aligned to this framework as well. So we're starting to see quite a lot of alignment, which I think is the point. So we don't just, everyone just goes off and just writes a job description and they all look very different. This is a way of trying to pull it together and aligning it to the policy. I won't mention that. So some lessons learned. We were able to disseminate this in a number of ways. Because it came from the Department of Health, that was really helpful, that there was a drive from the top down to get this out. And we had paper copies and PDF online copies for people to access. Some of the feedback, I think, it would have been, because it was a simple document, it would have been useful for some people to have more guidance on and how to use it in different ways. We've kind of gathered that as a sort of action learning approach, really, rather than dictating that from the start. It's been adapted many times. I've just adapted it for a city in the north of England, and there's a new version now. So these capabilities frameworks are never meant to be set in stone, that they should be refreshed and they should evolve as we learn new things and roles change as well. We are thinking now about developing some sort of assessment tool or way of self-assessing people. So there's no kind of assessment, and people have devised their own assessment tools to look at how people are on the capabilities. It's quite a challenge. I have looked at this and it's very complicated, but I think there's probably scope to develop some sort of tool to accompany it as well. And although we have got it on various websites, I think we probably could have had a dedicated website for it as well. So these are all things we've learned from the first time round that we can think about using for this. So We obviously haven't got the capabilities framework yet, because this is a kind of point at the end when we have all the information and we've talked to stakeholders. Some of you were involved in the discussions yesterday, and that was part of the stakeholders having ownership of what we think about how we should work with people who are involved in violence, who are substance users. So these are some of the emerging findings that I'm sort of picking up from listening to the qualitative feedback, from listening to stakeholders talk. I'll be conducting other groups in England and maybe in Spain as well, to talk to people in the same way about what they think about how they work now, how they think they could work in the future. So what's really important is to make sure we capture the cultural context. So obviously we talked yesterday in Brazil, and it'd be useful for me to now, from being here, to take that to other countries and try and process some of that. And also thinking about what kinds of knowledge people need, and there might be some knowledge that's different in different countries as well. People seem to want to know more about it, and people are saying, this is interesting because I've only thought about women, but now this is a new area that I hadn't thought about. So what is the knowledge that people will need to access, and that will inform our training as well. The other thing that seems to be becoming a bit of a theme is how to broach the subject, or how to raise the subject, or how to have the conversation. And there's been some comments about the fear of opening Pandora's box. I'm not really sure about my legal responsibility, so I perhaps avoid the question, or I'm a bit frightened of, if I ask, then I'm not really competent. And no practitioner wants to feel in that position. It's a really uncomfortable place, and that I've seen that with dual diagnosis. I've seen that working with sexual health in other contexts as well. That the barriers are not because people don't want to. It's just it's anxiety provoking, and we want to think about how the capabilities framework can help people think about the transferability of some of their skills, because everyone can have those difficult conversations. It's how you translate it to a different topic. I think the key thing will be understanding people's role within this kind of work, and thinking about different roles and different levels of intervention, because what we want to do is create a capabilities framework that promotes safe practice. So we don't want to say that everyone should be, delving into someone's violent past and asking lots of questions and then getting very stuck because they've gone beyond their own kind of remit and capabilities. So we need to be very clear about what is safe and what isn't safe practice. And also thinking about who else you need to work with, because this is an isolating kind of topic. People can feel very vulnerable and very frightened about how they manage that. They're worried about safety of others as well. So supervision, working in a team, working with other professionals will be really, really important. And I think finally, the issue around ethics and safety is a huge issue for this particular topic. I mean, there was issues in dual diagnosis because obviously some substance use is illegal, and there's Mental Health Act, and there's all sorts of safeguarding issues with that. But I think this takes it up a notch. It really does ramp the issues ethically, legally, and about safety personally and also interpersonally as well. So I think there's some challenges, but I'm also hearing some commonalities between, certainly so far the discussions I've had, I can see some core commonalities which will form the backbone of the product itself. And what I said yesterday is we had a dialogue, and I want to keep that dialogue open, so we'll be looking at ways that as things evolve, drafts of this, that people will have an opportunity to comment and contribute. So it's not that we've jetted in, listened, and then go off to our ivory towers and write it. That's not what I want to do. I want it to be a much more of an interactive process, so that people see it and they own it, and it's theirs, so they want to use it. The last thing I want to see is it's on a shelf, as Carlos said. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Então, eu quero agradecer a Liz, e a gente conseguiu se organizar no tempo, que estava um pouco atrasado no início. Agora a gente pode fazer 15 minutos, 13 minutos de 18 minutos de... a gente pode voltar aqui 10h45, conforme está no nosso programa, certo? Não estou conseguindo fazer a conta, desculpa aí. Tá? Então, para todo mundo poder ir no banheiro, tomar um café, uma aguinha. Na volta, nós vamos ouvir os nossos colegas da Espanha, que vão contar uma experiência lá da Espanha, onde o serviço de saúde mental tem já trabalhado com homens em parceria com uma ONG que trabalha com homens autores de violência. Então, talvez, se os headphones não chegarem até daqui 15 minutos, se vocês puderem falar em espanhol, you see, to speak in Spanish and show the slides, it would be lovely. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's okay? Porque os espanhóis, pelo menos, podem falar em espanhol devagar e mostrar os slides em inglês. Tá bom? Muito obrigada pela paciência de todo mundo. E a gente volta aqui 10h45 sem falta.